He was just walking. 17 years old, headphones snug over his ears. The world distilled to the rhythm pulsing through the wires. It was late afternoon, the sky a bruised purple fading to gray, the kind of sky that felt heavy with the day's end. Darius liked this time. The streets quieting down, the sounds of the city muffled by his music. He wasn't thinking about much, just the next beat, the next block, the familiar comfort of his worn sneakers hitting the pavement. His life felt small, contained, predictable in the way a teenager's often does: school, part-time job, flipping burgers, home. Rinse, repeat. There were dreams, of course, hazy outlines of leaving this neighborhood, seeing something more, but they felt distant, soundtracked by the music in his ears. The music cut out abruptly. He pulled the headphones down, the sudden silence stark and jarring. The street wasn't quiet anymore. Sirens screamed, tires squealed, and a harsh voice barked orders he couldn't immediately understand. He looked up. Blue and red lights pulsed, turning the darkening street into a disorienting strobe. Police cars, lots of them. Before he could process what was happening, before he could even take a step back, figures swarmed him. Uniformed officers, moving with a swift, practiced aggression that made his stomach clench. Hands grabbed him, rough and unyielding. He dropped his backpack, books and a half-eaten bag of chips spilling onto the cold asphalt. "Hey, what's going on?" he stammered, his voice thin and reedy with shock. Strong hands were already behind his back, metal cold against his wrists. Cuffs. The click echoed in the sudden, terrifying quiet that had fallen over the immediate area. Neighbors peered from doorways, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. An officer, older, with a harsh face and eyes that seemed to bore right through him, stood directly in front of him. Authority radiated from him like heat, but it felt cold, judgmental. This was Sergeant Miller, a name Darius would come to know too well, though he didn't know it yet. "We got a positive ID," Miller said, his voice low and hard, meant to intimidate. He didn't shout, he didn't need to. The authority in his tone was absolute. "You match the description." Darius blinked, trying to understand. Match what description? Description? For what? Miller ignored the question, already looking past him. "Suspect is in custody. Looks like our guy." "What guy?" Darius asked again, his heart hammering against his ribs. This couldn't be happening. This was a mistake. Terrible, frightening mistake. Miller finally looked back at him. A flicker of something that might have been satisfaction in his eyes, quickly masked by professional sternness. "Robbery at the corner store, kid. You fit the description. Tall, dark hoodie, backpack. Looks like you just came from that direction." Robbery? Darius's mind reeled. He hadn't come from that direction. He'd come from the burger place, cutting through the park like he always did. He was wearing a dark hoodie, yes, it was his favorite. And he had a backpack, everyone did. But a robbery? He was just walking home. "No, wait. That's wrong," Darius said, trying to keep his voice steady, trying to project the truth he knew internally. "I was at work, a burger barn on Elm. I just got off." Miller scoffed, a short, dismissive sound. Yeah, everyone's got an alibi. Save it. Let's go." They pulled him forward, away from his scattered belongings, away from the eyes of his neighbors. His protests were quiet now, swallowed by the vast, impersonal machine that had suddenly seized him. He felt the cold bite of the cuffs, the rough grip on his arm, the terrifying finality of it all. No questions, no real explanation, just based on a look. A description that could fit 1,000 teenagers in this city. "There's no evidence," Darius murmured, more to himself than them. "No witnesses saw me." The officers didn't respond. What happened next was the blur of being placed in the back of a police car, the door slamming shut with a sound that sealed him away from his normal life. The sirens wailed again, but this time, they were taking him somewhere he didn't want to go. He watched his street recede through the barred window, the familiar turning alien under the flashing lights. He felt utterly alone, the music in his head replaced by the sickening thud of fear and confusion. How could this happen? Just like that? Because of a hoodie and a backpack? At the precinct, the process was cold, clinical. Fingerprints, mugshot, questions that felt less like genuine inquiry and more like attempts to trip him up, to make him confess to something he hadn't done. He told them about Burger Barn, about his shift ending at 4:45 p.m., about walking through the park. They wrote it down, their faces impassive, but he saw the skepticism in their eyes, especially when Sergeant Miller was present. Miller seemed convinced, absolutely certain he had the right person. His certainty felt like a physical weight, pressing down on Darius, making it hard to breathe, hard to think clearly. It was like Miller's conviction alone was enough evidence. Darius was just a face that fit, a convenient solution to a crime. His truth didn't seem to matter. He was placed in a holding cell. The air was stale, cold. The concrete floor was hard. He wrapped his arms around himself, shivering despite the thin blanket they gave him. The reality of his situation began to sink in, heavy and suffocating. He was 17, never been in trouble beyond a late library book fee, and now he was accused of armed robbery. Based on nothing. He thought of his mother, his younger sister, how terrified they would be. Doubt began to creep in, insidious and chilling. Could they really do this? Could they really charge him without anything more? What if his alibi wasn't enough? What if no one believed him? The system felt vast, impersonal, and terrifyingly powerful. He felt like a small boat in a storm, with no sails and no shore in sight. He closed his eyes, trying to conjure the feeling of his headphones, of the music, of being in control of his own little world. Felt impossibly far away. He spent that night and several more in a juvenile detention facility. Each day was a gray, monotonous stretch of anxiety. His mother visited, her face etched with worry lines that hadn't been there before. She brought him food, a change of clothes, but mostly she brought tears and frantic energy. She was already working on finding a lawyer, pulling together every spare dollar. Her faith in him was a lifeline, but even that couldn't entirely chase away the gnawing fear that this nightmare might not end. The lawyer arrived a few days later. Her name was Evelyn Reed. She was younger than Darius expected, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor that was a balm to his frayed nerves. She didn't look at him like the police had, like he was already guilty. She looked at him like a person who had a story to tell, a truth to uncover. They sat in a small, sterile room. He told her everything, painstakingly, from the moment he clocked out at Burger Barn to the moment the handcuffs clicked. He described his walk home, the music, the sudden chaos. He repeated his time of leaving work, 4:45 p.m. He mentioned the park route, the specific turn he took. He told her he hadn't been anywhere near the corner store at the time of the robbery, which he now knew had been reported around 5:10 p.m. Mr. Reed listened intently, taking notes. She asked specific questions about his work schedule, his route, anyone he might have seen. "Did you see anyone else in the park?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not really. Just a few people way off. Nobody I knew or talked to." "Any security cameras along your route?" He frowned, trying to think. His usual path through the park was mostly trees and paths. "Not that I know of in the park itself." He paused. "There's cameras at Burger Barn, I guess. And isn't there one across from the corner store? Like, on the gas station across the street?" Mr. Reed's eyes lit up slightly. "A gas station camera? Across the street? Do you know the name of the station? Speedy Mart, I think?" Darius said, the name clicking into place. He'd bought snacks there sometimes, but never the corner store that was robbed. This was the first spark of hope. Mr. Reed explained that getting access to such footage wouldn't be easy. Businesses weren't always cooperative, and the police might not have bothered if they were already convinced they had the guy. But she promised she would try. The days blurred into weeks. Darius stayed locked away. He read library books, did the minimal required schooling, and tried to stay out of trouble. The initial shock gave way to a dull ache of frustration and helplessness. He thought about Sergeant Miller, that look of absolute certainty. It felt like a personal attack, a dismissal of his entire existence based on a superficial resemblance. The injustice of it festered, hardening his quiet determination. He wasn't a criminal. He wouldn't act like one, even if he was trapped in a place for them. Mr. Reed visited regularly. She was a tireless advocate. She got his work records from Burger Barn, confirming his clock-out time. She tracked down Mr. Henderson, his manager, who vaguely remembered seeing Darius leave around the usual time, though he couldn't be precise to the minute. It wasn't the rock-solid alibi they needed, the kind that put him miles away. Elm Street wasn't that far from the corner store, maybe a 25-minute walk, depending on the route and speed. But Mr. Reed argued that his usual park route was longer than a direct path down the main street, and that he often took his time listening to music. Then came the breakthrough. Mr. Reed managed to get a court order for the Speedy Mart surveillance footage. The process was arduous, met with some resistance from the police who felt it was unnecessary, a waste of time. Sergeant Miller, she told Darius, was particularly resistant, arguing it was a fishing expedition. But Mr. Reed persisted. She believed Darius. That belief, too, became a source of strength. Days later, she came back, her face carefully neutral. "I have it," she said, holding up a small USB drive. The footage from Speedy Mart, dated the day of the robbery, around the time in question. Darius's heart leaped into his throat. This was it. Proof. Or nothing. What if the camera angle was wrong? What if it had malfunctioned? The anxiety was almost unbearable. "Can we watch it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mr. Reed hesitated. "We can. But it's not conclusive on its own, Darius. We need to establish the time code is accurate. And it only shows what happened at the gas station, not everywhere you were." They watched it together in a small office at the detention center. The video was grainy, black and white, the timestamp in the corner flickering. Mr. Reed focused on the time. 5:08 p.m. 5:09 p.m. Just minutes before the robbery across the street was reported. They watched as a figure walked into the frame, wearing a dark hoodie, a backpack slung over one shoulder. The figure walked to the vending machine near the entrance. Darius leaned closer, his breath catching in his throat. That walk. That was his walk. The way he shifted his weight, the slight bounce in his step even when just walking a few feet. The way he reached for the specific change in his pocket. On the screen, the figure fumbled with some coins, selected a drink, bent down to retrieve it. The camera angle was slightly from the side, but clear enough. It was him. It was definitely him. At 5:09 p.m., he was at the Speedy Mart, 3 blocks away from the corner store robbery that happened minutes later. 3 blocks. That walk, even at a sprint, would take several minutes, certainly more than the 1 or 2 minutes between the timestamp on the video and the reported time of the robbery. And he wasn't sprinting in the video. He was calmly buying a drink. It wasn't a perfect alibi, placing him hours away, but it was powerful. It placed him a significant distance away, moving in a direction that didn't immediately lead to the scene of the crime, at the exact time the crime was occurring or immediately before. It contradicted the prosecution's likely claim that he was the person seen fleeing the store. Mr. Reed looked at him, a small, determined smile on her face. "We have something here, Darius. This puts you 3 blocks away, at 5:09 p.m. The robbery happened at 5:10. That's a powerful piece of evidence." Hope surged through him, hot and bright, cutting through the long weeks of fear and despair. This wasn't just his word against theirs anymore. This was concrete. This was irrefutable. What happened next was the lead-up to the trial. The charges were formalized. Darius pleaded not guilty. Sergeant Miller's initial report, based purely on resemblance and proximity, or perceived proximity, formed the basis of the prosecution's case. They seemed confident, almost dismissive of the defense. After all, they had an eyewitness description that matched the defendant, and the defendant was picked up not far from the scene shortly after the crime. It looked open and shut to them. They hadn't anticipated the video. The trial began. Darius sat beside Mr. Reed, trying to project a calm he didn't entirely feel. His mother and sister were in the gallery, their presence a quiet comfort and a heavy responsibility. The prosecution presented their case. The corner store owner, shaken but certain, described the robber: tall, male, dark hoodie, backpack. He looked at Darius, his gaze lingering, and nodded, confirming the resemblance. Sergeant Miller testified, recounting the arrest, his certainty unwavering. He described Darius's appearance, highlighting how perfectly he matched the description they had received. He was polished, confident, used to being in charge, used to being believed. He made it sound simple, logical. The kid fit, the kid was nearby, end of story. He never mentioned the alibi Darius had offered at the time of arrest, nor did he seem to give it any weight. Darius listened, a knot tightening in his stomach. It sounded convincing, laid out like that. It sounded like he was the robber. Despite knowing the truth, the weight of the prosecution's authority, their confident tone, made him doubt himself for a terrifying second. This is how innocent people got convicted, he realized. Not just by lies, but by plausible narratives built on flimsy foundations, presented with absolute conviction. Mr. Reed cross-examined the store owner gently, focusing on the vagueness of the description. Dark hoodie? Backpack? How many people fit that description? The owner admitted it was common attire, but insisted the build was right. Mr. Reed then questioned Sergeant Miller. She was respectful but persistent. "Sergeant Miller," she began, her voice clear and steady. "You testified that my client was apprehended based on fitting a description of the suspect. Did you conduct any further investigation at the scene to corroborate this initial assessment?" Miller shifted in his seat, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "We secured the scene, spoke to witnesses. The description was consistent." "Consistent, yes," Mr. Reed acknowledged. "But did any witness specifically identify my client, Darius Jones, as the person they saw?" Miller hesitated. "Not specifically. The description was general. And you apprehended my client several blocks away from the store, correct?" "Near the general vicinity," Miller said, choosing his words carefully. "Near, yes, but not fleeing the immediate scene." "He was walking away from that direction," Miller stated firmly, regaining his composure, "toward his residence." "At what time was he apprehended, Sergeant?" "Approximately 5:25 p.m., Miller replied. "And the robbery was reported at 5:10 p.m.? "That's correct." Mr. Reed nodded slowly. "So, 15 minutes after the reported time of the robbery, you apprehended a young man matching a general description, several blocks away, walking home." "He fit the description perfectly," Miller reiterated, leaning into the microphone. His tone suggested this fact alone should end the discussion. "Perfectly," Mr. Reed repeated, allowing a moment of silence to hang in the air. She then moved on, asking about standard police procedure, about seeking out potential alibis or contradictory evidence. Miller defended his actions, his certainty unwavering, borderline arrogant. He seemed untouchable in his conviction. Then came the defense's turn to present evidence. Mr. Reed called a technician from Speedy Mart to testify about the security camera system, confirming the accuracy of the timestamp on the footage. She established the camera's field of view, confirming it covered the vending machine area visible from the street. The technician was nervous but clear. Next, Mr. Reed addressed the judge. "Your Honor, the defense would like to present video evidence obtained via court order from the Speedy Mart located at 1423 Maple Street, across the street from the scene of the alleged robbery." A low murmur went through the courtroom. The prosecution team exchanged glances, a flicker of curiosity, maybe concern, in their eyes. Sergeant Miller, still in the courtroom gallery, leaned forward, a frown creasing his brow. The lights were dimmed slightly. A large screen flickered to life, showing the grainy, black and white image with the timestamp running in the corner. Mr. Reed narrated calmly. "This is footage from the Speedy Mart surveillance system on the date of the incident, October 27th. We are showing footage starting at 5:07 p.m. The seconds ticked by on the screen. 5:08 p.m. 5:09 p.m. And then the figure walked into frame. The figure in the dark hoodie with the backpack. The figure who walked to the vending machine. Could the witness please identify the person on the screen?" Mr. Reed asked the Speedy Mart technician, who was still on the stand. That appears to be a young man buying a drink from the vending machine, the technician said, stating the obvious. Can you confirm the time visible on the screen? It reads 5:09 p.m. and 37 seconds. The technician confirmed. Mr. Reed turned to the jury, her voice gaining strength. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this video shows my client, Darius Jones, at the Speedy Mart, 3 blocks away from the corner store, at 5:09 p.m. The reported time of the robbery across the street was 5:10 p.m. This places Darius Jones a considerable distance away from the scene of the crime at the moment the crime was reported to have occurred. She paused, letting the weight of the statement sink in. On the screen, Darius could see the prosecutor's face. It was a mask of disbelief, then confusion, quickly followed by a dawning horror. He hadn't seen this footage before. Sergeant Miller's face was even more telling. His jaw had gone slack, his eyes glued to the screen. His earlier arrogance completely evaporated, replaced by shock and perhaps, just perhaps, a flicker of fear. He had been so certain, so dismissive. This video was a direct refutation of his core assertion. The silence in the courtroom was profound, broken only by the whirring of the projector and the quiet clicks of keyboards as reporters typed. Everyone was watching the screen, watching the figure that was undeniably Darius, calmly buying a soda just minutes before the world they knew collapsed around him. Mr. Reed let the footage play for another minute, showing Darius retrieving his drink, turning and walking out of frame, heading away from the corner store. Then she had the screen turned off. The defense rests, she said, her voice ringing with quiet triumph. The prosecution was scrambling. They hadn't prepared for this. Sergeant Miller had clearly been wrong in his initial assessment, relying solely on a visual match and disregarding the alibi and the possibility of other evidence. The alibi that had seemed weak now had concrete, time-stamped video proof backing it up. It wasn't just Darius's word. It was objective fact captured on camera. The judge called for a short recess before closing arguments. Darius looked at his mother, who gave him a trembling smile, tears streaming down her face. Mr. Reed squeezed his arm, a silent message of congratulations and reassurance. During closing arguments, the prosecutor tried to recover, arguing that 3 blocks could be covered quickly, that maybe the timestamp was slightly off, that the initial description was strong. But his arguments felt hollow, desperate, lacking the conviction of Sergeant Miller's earlier testimony or Mr. Reed's video evidence. The air had shifted. The jury's eyes kept flicking back to Darius, no longer seeing a likely criminal, but a young man caught in an unfortunate, possibly wrongful situation. Mr. Reed's closing argument was powerful. She didn't need to be loud or aggressive. She simply laid out the facts. A vague description, an arrest based on appearance, a young man's consistent alibi, and the undeniable time-stamped video footage placing him 3 blocks away at the critical moment. Prejudice comes in many forms, she said, looking directly at the jury. Sometimes it is overt. Sometimes it is subtle, ingrained in assumptions based on how someone looks, where they are from, or the clothes they wear. My client, Darius Jones, was arrested not because there was evidence against him, but because he looked like the guy. Because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time wearing a dark hoodie and a backpack. But evidence matters. Facts matter. And this video, she gestured to the now dark screen, provides an objective fact. It shows Darius Jones was not across the street robbing a store at 5:10 p.m. He was 3 blocks away, buying a soda at 5:09 p.m. That is not mere distance. That is the distance between assumption and truth, between injustice and justice. The case went to the jury. Darius waited, every second stretching into an eternity. He watched the jury file out, trying to read their faces. They seemed thoughtful, serious. The air in the courtroom felt thick with anticipation. He didn't have long to wait. The jury didn't even wait an hour. An hour. For weeks of his life, for the terror and uncertainty he had endured, for the reputation that had been stained, the jury took less than 60 minutes to decide his fate. They filed back in. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, stood. "Have you reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "We have, Your Honor." Darius held his breath. Mr. Reed placed a hand on his arm. "On the charge of armed robbery, how do you find?" The foreman's voice was clear, firm. "Not guilty. Not guilty." The words washed over Darius, a wave of pure, unadulterated relief. He sagged against Mr. Reed, his legs suddenly weak. Tears that had been held back for weeks finally spilled over, hot and cleansing. His mother cried out, a sound of pure joy and anguish, and rushed forward, embracing him tightly. His sister clung to his other side. Sergeant Miller sat in the gallery, his face a mask of shock and disbelief, mirroring the look the prosecutor had worn when the video played. His certainty, his initial arrogant judgment, had been publicly dismantled by a silent, grainy video. Darius was free. The system, for all its flaws, for all the fear it had instilled, had ultimately delivered justice, thanks to a persistent lawyer and a mundane security camera. What happened next was a whirlwind. He was formally released. Stepping out of the courthouse into the sunlight felt like stepping onto another planet. The air was fresh, the sounds of the city vibrant, not muffled by fear. He wasn't heading back to a cold cell. He was heading home. The ride home with his family was quiet, filled with the unspoken weight of what they had all been through, and the profound relief of its ending. Darius looked out the window, seeing his city with new eyes. He had been invisible, then targeted, then seen, truly seen by the 12 strangers on the jury. He knew he was lucky. Lucky Mr. Reed had believed him. Lucky the gas station camera existed and was working. Lucky the timestamp was accurate. Lucky the jury paid attention to the evidence. So many things could have gone wrong. His heart ached for those who weren't so lucky, whose truth remained hidden, whose innocence was overshadowed by circumstance or prejudice. This experience had changed him irrevocably. The headphones still went on, but the music now sometimes felt like a thin veil over a world he now knew could be both beautiful and terrifyingly unfair. He had seen the casual cruelty of misjudgment, the destructive power of assumption. But he had also seen the quiet power of truth, the importance of perseverance, and the impact a single piece of evidence, a single person's belief could have. He thought about Sergeant Miller. Would this change him? Would he be more careful, less likely to judge a book by its cover, or a teenager by his hoodie? Darius didn't know. The system might hold Miller accountable or it might not. But for Darius, the important thing was his own vindication, the clearing of his name. His inherent worth, his innocence, had been validated not by shouting or fighting, but by the quiet, undeniable proof of where he was and who he was not. The narrative of his life had taken a dramatic turn, from ordinary to accused criminal to vindicated survivor. He wasn't just a teenager with headphones anymore. He was a young man who had faced injustice and come through it, his resilience tested and proven. His hidden quality wasn't a secret talent, but an inner strength and dignity that had shone brightest when he had nothing else. Justice, he learned, wasn't always automatic. Sometimes it had to be fought for, painstakingly uncovered from under layers of assumption and indifference. And sometimes, the smallest, most overlooked detail, like a timestamp on a security camera across the street, could hold the weight of undeniable truth, enough to shatter a case built on prejudice and set an innocent person free. His story became a quiet testament to the dangers of judging based on appearance, the ease with which prejudice can manifest, and the vital importance of seeking actual evidence and truth. It was a reminder that everyone, no matter how young or unassuming, deserves to be seen for who they truly are, not for who someone assumes them to be. What happened next for Darius was about rebuilding. Rebuilding his sense of safety, his trust, his future. He went back to Burger Barn, back to school. But he carried the experience with him, a constant, silent reminder of how fragile freedom and reputation could be. He became more observant, more empathetic to others facing hardship, more aware of the subtle biases that permeated daily life. His story, quietly shared, served as an inspiration. It showed that even when the odds seem stacked against you, when authority seems absolute and your truth unheard, perseverance and the pursuit of evidence can prevail. It highlighted the fact that hidden potential, or in Darius's case, hidden innocence and resilience, often goes unnoticed until crisis forces it into the light. His experience was a powerful illustration that appearances can be deceiving, that assumptions can be dangerous, and that a person's true worth is found not in their outward presentation or someone else's judgment, but in their character, their actions, and their truth. Darius, the kid with the headphones, became a symbol, unintentional but potent, of standing firm in the face of injustice, trusting in the power of evidence, and finding vindication against overwhelming odds. Remember this story. What happened to Darius could happen to anyone. A wrong place, a wrong time, a simple mistaken identity amplified by prejudice and haste. It is a stark reminder of the critical need for thorough investigation, for questioning assumptions, and for the undeniable power of objective evidence in the pursuit of true justice. It teaches us that the smallest details matter, that truth has a way of revealing itself, and that resilience in the face of adversity is a profound strength. Never let someone else's judgment define you. Fight for your truth, seek the evidence, and remember that even a grainy video from a gas station across the street can hold the key to setting things right. Be Darius. Be resilient. Seek the truth. And never, ever judge a book solely by its cover.